Salve, salve, guitar and musical community. Um, the next following videos will be about theory. So there are several ways to understand music theory and relate to what you're playing on the guitar or the piano, any instrument really. The next couple of videos we will explain what is a major scale, how chords are formed, the function of each chord, what is the difference between major and minor chords. And depending on how these videos go, we can shift the lesson towards another direction and add other concepts to the mix. So, with no further ado, let's go on a musical journey together. Alright, so we'll start by talking about scales. And before we even begin, let's listen to something here, and I want like for you to tell me if it sounds familiar or not. So here we go. One more time, let's try in a different spot. Why not here a third time? Why not here twice, just up an octave, so. I think the most familiar example is if you've seen The Sound of Music, which I hope you have. There's a song, Do, Re, Mi, Do, a deer, a female deer, and so on. What we're listening to is what we call the Ionian major scale. Okay, it's nothing more than a sequence of notes. You're listening to 7 notes, and then when you hear the 8th note, is just the first note, just an octave above. So, for instance, if we're in G, here's the low G. You can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or you can go back to 1. Doesn't really matter in that case. But if I go up the fretboard of the guitar or down and I follow a certain sequence, I'm gonna stumble about the same type of sound. So when I go up, and so on. Okay? How do we explain that? Why does that happen? Okay? So let's go on that. In Western music, we use 12 tones, in which 7 of these tones are more familiar than others. The best way to show these 12 tones is by looking at a keyboard instrument. So you should be seeing the picture right there. If you're thinking that the white keys are the most common ones, you're correct. They don't have, it's just C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and that repeats over and over in the keyboard and also in the guitar. Okay, later on we can show the fretboard and how the fretboard works. Okay, now take a look at the black keys. First thing you notice that between the notes E and F, you don't have a black key. And then between the notes B and C, you also do not have one. That is quite important. We'll come back to that in a little bit. However, still looking at the black keys, you notice that you have 2 names under each black key. For example, the first black key right after C is C sharp and D flat. And then you have D sharp and E flat and so on. Why do we have 2 names for those? Are they the same thing? Sound-wise, yes, they are. The one above, the first one, the C sharp, if we're thinking of a melody that's going forward or this direction, then we're going to call it C sharp. So for example, if I go from C to this following note here, which is C sharp, that's how we're going to call this note C sharp. Now, if I'm in D, which here is D, and I go to the same note that I was just playing earlier, now we're going to call that D flat. Here's another example. Here is D. Okay? If I go to the very next note here, that's going to be called what? Exactly, D sharp. Now, if I'm on E, and I go back to the same note, we're going to call that what? E flat. How do we count for the notes that, for example, between E and F, where you don't have a black key? Well, then it's E and F. So in this situation, for example, here's the E again. If I go right to the next note, that's just F. If I go back, that's just E. I hope that makes sense. Okay, now that we have explained the black keys and the 12 tones, so if you're going up, it's sharp. If you're going down, it's flat. Let's move forward a little bit, okay? This scale that we're talking about, the Ionian major scale, thinking sound of music. How do we form this sound? How is this sound mathematically constructed, okay? Basically, each of the 12 tones is what it counts for, we call a half step. Remember that, half step. So C is a half step, C sharp is another half step, D is a half step, so on. Any note, any of those 12 tones in the guitar or in any instrument, if I just play one note by itself and I play the very next note right after that, that's the distance of a half step. Okay, so D sharp to E, it's a half step. G to G sharp, it doesn't matter. Okay? What happens if we combine two half steps together? We have a whole step. Okay? And the formula that you're about to see on the screen is the formula that we're going to use to form an Ionian major scale. Whole, whole, half. Whole, 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 half. Does that look familiar to what you see in the keyboard? It should. Okay? That will happen over and over. If you find a C on the keyboard, the very first C on the piano, for example, and you just play note by note by note, just stay on the white keys. Every time after 7 notes, you're going to start a new Ionian major scale, just an octave higher. Okay? The guitar is a little more difficult to explain that because it was not shaped to explain theory, but because, you know, I'm a guitarist and most of my students are guitarists, later on we're going to relate this to guitar, but for now I just want to make sure that you understand what we're talking about. Okay? So, once again, the formula we're going to use in the next part of the video is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Remember this. This is the most important aspect of this lesson. Alright? Let's move forward. Okay, before moving forward, let's review once again. How many different tones are out there? 12. Okay? How many of those tones are more common than others? 7. Okay? How many of those tones or notes have the same sound, but they can have different names depending on how you're approaching the melody? That's not something we're going to get to it right now. Right now you just got to know that some of those tones can have 2 different names. 5 of those. So we're talking about the black keys. Give me one of them. C sharp and D flat, right? Or let's think about D sharp and E flat. They're all G sharp and G flat. Okay, that should be easy for you to understand. What is the formula that we're going to use to form an Ionian major scale? Whole, whole, half. Whole, 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 half. Alright. If we have 7 notes, 7 of those most common notes, and we heard this sound before. I just played those 7 notes. If I play the next note, it's just following the same pattern. It's just what? The first note, but higher. So here's the first note. Here's the 8th note. Just, you know, a higher sound. So an octave higher. We call that the distance of an octave. Piano players, they can go over and over. We don't have that luxury. All right. Now, how does this formula apply to other keys? Because so far we've been talking about the key of C. We've been using the key of C, and most examples, at least on my videos, I'm always going to use the key of C as an example because it's just the natural sound. It has no accidentals. So in order to form this sound, you do not need any sharps or flats. All right? How do I go? Let's say I want to form a major Ionian scale in the key of G. Here's what I'd like for you to do right now. I'd like for you to write from G to G. Okay, you should see that on the board already. So you have G, A, B, C, D, E, and F. And then G again. Let's do the math. From G to A, is that a distance of a whole step? Take a look at the piano. Take a look at the other board. You might not be able to see my face right now, but at least you can see what's on the board. So, between G and A, do we have a black key in there? Yes. So that's a whole step. Alright. Between A and B, do we have a whole step in there? Yes. Between B and C, do we have a half step in there? Because we need a half step, right? Yes. Good. So far, our formula is working. What happens between C and D? Is that a whole step? Good. Check. What about between, what's the next one? D and E. Whole step. E and F. Is that a whole step? No. Do we need a whole step in there? Yes, right? Because the formula last time I checked is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. What do we do now? How do we transform that into a whole step? Well, here's the answer. That F that you previously saw on the board, we're going to change that F to an F sharp. Now, all of a sudden, the distance between E and F sharp is the distance of a whole step. 2 notes, there's a note in between. So, representation, oops, sorry if the camera. Here is an E, here is an F sharp, which is exactly what we need, a whole step. If I kept the same, it would be this. That's not the sound we're looking for. Here's what it sounds like with the F natural without being the F sharp. Sounds like this. Doesn't sound quite the same. With the half step, so with the F sharp, sounds like this. Our ear needs to listen to that. If we're thinking Ionian major scale, the other scale that I play with the F natural is a scale as well, just not the one we're studying right now. that formula of whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half would be wrong. Okay? Let us do another one. All right. Let's suppose now that we are in D major. Okay? We're going to form D Ionian major scale. The process is the same. I would like for you to write down from D to D. So 7 notes, and then you repeat D again. 8. So go ahead. D, E, F, G, A, B, C, and D again. Let us do the same process. You can use the piano or the keyboard picture so you can identify. Make sure you're looking at the formula. It's a lot of things for you to take a look at it. But once you learn this and you memorize, you're not going to even think about it anymore. It's just going to come like second nature. Okay? So let's begin. From D to C. No, sorry. From D to E, is that a whole step? Do we have a black key in there? Yes. Good. What about between E and F? Is that a whole step? No. Do we need a whole step in there? So what do we do? The answer should be easy because we just did the G. Yes. F becomes F sharp. Okay, then what happens to F sharp to G? Because isn't that gonna mess up the math? Actually, it's actually gonna help, because if you go back from D to E, whole step. E to F sharp now, whole step. F sharp to G, half step, which is exactly what we need. Moving forward. From G to A, whole step. A to B, whole step. B to C, half step. So what do we do there? Exactly. C sharp. C sharp to D, half step, which is exactly what we need. Then you have whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. You might have heard this before from me or from another music teacher, but what we call that is just every time you put a sharp, kids nowadays might want to call that hashtags. Basically, you're just adding an accidental, okay? An accidental to the mix. The only scale, Ionian major scale, that does not have any accidentals, I mentioned this in this video already, is the C major scale. Okay, that's why we start with that, and that's why the keyboard is, let's say, designed that way, so it looks pretty for you to understand. Okay, we're gonna do a different example now. This example we're gonna use flats and not sharps. The two examples we've done so far are using sharps. So let's do F major. You know the process. Go ahead and write it down from F to F. So you have F, then you have G, A, B, C, D, E, and F again. From F to G, what do you have? Whole step. From G to A, whole step. From A to B, whole step. Wait a minute. We have 3 whole steps in a row. Do we need that? Now we need a half step, but we have a whole step. When we're dealing with sharps, the problem is the opposite. We usually have half steps, and we need to turn those half steps into whole steps. So what do we do now? Simple. We take B and make B a flat. So from A to B flat. Now, if you go to the beginning of your formula, we have from F to G, whole step, G to A, whole step, A to B flat, half step. B flat to C, whole step. Great, good. C to D, whole step. D to E, whole step. E to F, half step, which is already there for you. So on the scale, on the major scale of F, Ionian major scale, all you really need is what? To put a flat on the B. Okay? I hope that makes sense. And once you, there's no hiding with the sound. One thing that when I was first learning this, and I was 12, 13 years old, I would write down the scale, and then I'll go on the guitar or piano, and I'll try to play those notes and see if they sounded, you know, accordingly to what I'm supposed to hear, which is, think again, sound of music. If you go on Google and type sound of a major Ionian scale, or if you go on YouTube, you're gonna get lots and lots of examples. So this should be a sound that should be familiar to you. We're done with the first video, I think. In this video, I explained to you a lot, but hopefully it makes sense. And something that I did not mention before, but it's there. Attached to this video and on my website, there's a package. It's in a PDF format. I prepared the package myself. Basically, it's just a review of everything that I've explained to you via video. I suggest that you watch the video, make sure you stop in the video as you watch, then you work on the package. The package is just, a lot of the things are the same, some of the graphics are even the same graphics that I had from the package. Basically, all you have to do really is go over the package and complete the assignments. You should notice by the end of the assignments that there's a pattern. Okay? I did not just give you random scales to work on for no reason, okay? And hopefully in the next video I'll find a window to explain the pattern of major scales and using sharps, and the major scales using flats. But what you should know is that if you're like getting to a point where, oh, I can play a few scales on the guitar, I can play a few chords, but I would like to be better, I would like to solo, I would like to compose, this stuff that we're talking about right now, it's really important, okay? Without this, you're not going to move much forward. You might have a great year and you might be able to create some cool things, but if you want to try to be a practical musician, someone that can just walk into a room and understand what's going on, you're going to have to study this. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me. My website has all my contact information. You can go there. My students, I'll see you in class, so hopefully you have a lot of questions and I'll be able to answer them. Otherwise, stay flame, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Ciao.